Okay, so for those of you on Facebook who have not been following my bailout series here at WWL-TV Channel 4, let me just recap what has brought us to this point where a top assistant to the mayor is involved in bailing out suspects that were touted when they were arrested by the police chief. Number one, we have a major revolution going on at New Orleans Criminal Court with bails at historic lows as part of a big reform push to lower the jail population, to not penalize suspects who don't have money by making them sit in jail after their arrest. It's a part of a reform movement that's been going on all around the country, and it has taken root here in New Orleans. But there's another couple of layers to this. In addition to the low bails, a group of entrepreneurs, activists, and people concerned about the criminal justice system and perhaps some inequities in the criminal justice system have started a fund, and they call it the Freedom Fund. And what this fund does is it collects money from donors and other activists to actually post the bail for some suspects who can't afford to post their own cash bail. By paying the cash bail, it does a few things. It cuts out bail bondsmen, bail bond industry. In that case, you actually pay a bail bondsman. It's a non-refundable. That is seen as a drain on poor people. Number two, by paying cash bail, that money can be refunded if the defendant successfully appears in court, doesn't reoffend, and completes his or her case in court once it's adjudicated, whatever the outcome is. If the case is completed, that suspect or suspect's family gets the money back. With the Freedom Fund, the money goes back to the fund, and it can then be used to bail out other people. But the next layer in this is where it gets controversial. The fund was actually started and incorporated by a man named Joshua Cox. He is the mayor's Director of Strategic Initiatives. It's a very lofty position within her administration, a $110,000 a year job, and at the same time he is operating this fund and himself personally posting bail to let out some suspects. He's also at City Hall working for the mayor, and that's where he draws some critics and the mayor draws some critics, starting with what we exposed tonight in our report, the largest drug roundup since LaToya Cantrell became mayor, and actually the largest drug sweep in several years by the NOPD, was this August, called Operation Summer Heat. This is where undercover police officers hit the streets, responding to drug hotspots, responding to citizens' complaints, to actually purchase narcotics, mostly heroin and crack cocaine, from drug suspects. And at the end of the operation, after making a bunch of these cases, there was a big roundup August 13th, and this announcement in which the mayor, LaToya Cantrell, stood side by side with the police chief and vowed that she would ensure that the police department would not rest until every one of the last Operation Summer Heat suspects was taken off the street. Well, what was not publicized like that press announcement about Summer Heat was the fact that Joshua Cox, her top aide, was busy with the Freedom Fund bailing out some of those very same suspects that had been rounded up. This was never publicized until we dug it up in previous stories, so that it was not known to the police officers. We talked to the heads of the police associations and got quite a startled reaction that there were these sort of mixed missions coming out of the mayor and coming out of City Hall. Now, with this piece, which is actually the third bailout story that we've done here, we also finally got some of the fund organizers to sit down and explain their mission and explain their philosophy. And it matches reforms that have been going on in other cities. There is quite a movement to reduce incarceration rates, something that, as these organizers pointed out, is sorely needed in Louisiana, which until very recently had the title of the highest incarceration rate of any state in the nation, now dropped to second behind Oklahoma, but that's led by New Orleans, which has its own high incarceration rate. So the city, in its reform efforts, is looking at ways to reduce the jail population. One of the ways to do that is to look at those who have been arrested but not yet convicted and see what kind of bail they're being held under. So this confluence of much lower bails than what we've seen in previous years, a freedom fund that is pooling money to bail these people out, and one of the mayor's assistants actually starting the fund and continuing, despite his role in City Hall, to post the bail for some of these suspects, leads to obvious questions. For example, let's consider the criminal histories, the background. I'm in a working newsroom here, as you can hear in the background. The criminal histories on some of these suspects were somewhat troubling, and tomorrow night we will have another installment of the Bailout series in which we take a deeper look at some of the individual suspects, and I'll just give you kind of an example of some of the things we found. For example, we had a suspect who had previously been arrested, I believe it was a simple battery, was bailed out by the Freedom Fund, and then subsequently got picked up in Operation Summer Heat for allegedly selling crack cocaine to an undercover officer. He got bailed out then a second time by the Freedom Fund. So that leads the police department, police officers, and their representatives speaking on their behalf to wonder, is this greasing the wheels of the revolving door over at the jail and criminal court? So that's just one example of some of the many suspects who legitimately raise some questions, and critics lined up on maybe the opposition to this effort, or people like the district attorney, Leon Canizero, the Metropolitan Crime Commission, questioning the actions. But on the other hand, the reformers include not just the organizers of this fund, but City Council President Jason Williams and Mayor LaToya Cantrell herself. This was a position that was actually a platform of hers when she ran for mayor. She has continued now that she is in office, but as you can see from the reactions of our police department, she has to, appeal to many different constituencies, one of them being the largest department in the city, that being the police department. And right now there's quite a bit of grumbling and questions by those rank and file officers. Now we see that a question of why they were bailed out. Well, people are innocent until proven guilty, and it's a constitutional right to have bail set, and bail that is not excessive, is how the Constitution reads, if a person is deemed to not be a flight risk and to not be a danger to the community. By the fact that they went through a first appearance, what we call a magistrate hearing, where a bail is set, the suspect's charge, their criminal history, ties to the community, are all considered when the bail amount is set. So the very astute question from one of our Facebook viewers was, why were these particular individuals singled out to be helped by the Freedom Fund? the criteria that the Freedom Fund organizers stated to me was that all a suspect had to have were local ties, some roots in the community, so that they would not be a flight risk, and that the bail was set by a magistrate at $5,000 or less. That in itself leads to quite a large pool of suspects now that we have much lower bails. As I highlighted in a previous story, bail amounts now, with this big push to lower the jail population and to get on board with some of these criminal justice reforms, is that bail amounts are being set in some cases 1/10 of what has been sort of the standard for decades over at Tulane and Broad. So those things all, you know, sort of coming together in the form of this bail reform movement have led to some what critics say are very questionable decisions on who this Freedom Fund is choosing to release. And I encourage everyone to continue watching our series, because we will later highlight some people who were passed over by the fund, who seem to be stellar candidates with no criminal background, nonviolent first offenders with, in many cases, some pressing needs, whether it be a job, medical issues, to be released, instead of what we will be highlighting Friday, tomorrow night, 10 o'clock, are suspects with some of the longest and most troubling rap sheets of any suspect passing through criminal court. So it does lead to questions about, is this Freedom Fund looking deeply into the criminal histories of these defendants? Could there be a better way? Maybe this reform is a good idea but poorly executed. We are digging deep to try to get answers to these questions. One thing that has not happened yet is we have not heard from Joshua Cox. City Hall did not grant him permission to be interviewed about this and his role. And we have yet to be able to pose questions to the mayor as she deals with these conflicting constituencies. Number one, sort of the reform group, which I know that, you know, that is a group that helped get her elected, number one. But then now she is the boss of the police chief and presides over the entire police department. So that's a constituency that is troubled by the fact that her aide is going right back behind their efforts to bail people out that they've freshly arrested. Now, somebody asked if there is an effort to rehabilitate. These are pre-trial detainees, freshly arrested suspects. So at this very early stage of their criminal case, there's no rehabilitation per se, because they remain innocent until proven guilty. However, a judge or magistrate can set some conditions of bail if they see something in their criminal history, if upon arrest they test positive for drugs, and some of those things include periodic drug testing. It can include an ankle monitoring bracelet for home incarceration, and in many cases bail can be denied if a person has jumped bail while awaiting trial in an earlier arrest, if there's a warrant in another jurisdiction. And that was one of the interesting things that I'll be revealing Friday night. One of the suspects where bail was posted by the Freedom Fund was somebody with a very long rap sheet who actually had an outstanding warrant from Texas and really had no grounds to be released at all. So even though the Freedom Fund would not directly answer questions about individual suspects that they helped, I was able to uncover the criminal history and the fact that perhaps this was not well researched by the fund, to be posting bail for somebody who ultimately didn't get out because that person was wanted in Texas and is on an extradition list to get sent back there to answer to another pending charge. So once again, I encourage everyone to continue following what is starting to bubble up as a major issue that is just now sort of coming out of the shadows. What's really been fascinating for me as a reporter covering this is how quietly this revolution took place. There was no announcement of the Freedom Fund. The order to try to lower the jail population by lowering bail amounts was done by a secret en banc order of all the judges of criminal court. We were able to uncover that document. Once again, never publicized, no policy announcement. And then obviously the mayor's push, which was simply a position that she took while running for mayor, now seems to be being put into action by her Director of Strategic Initiatives, Joshua Cox. So please reach out to me or the station WWL-TV on Facebook as we continue this series, because there's a lot more to come, and you're going to be amazed Friday night 10 o'clock at some of the long and troubling criminal histories of some of the drug suspects released by this fund.